This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, the manga podcast where Guardian Enzo and I, Samu, discuss some of our favourite series and figure out, is my taste better than yours?
Hello again, everybody. It's your old pal, Guardian Enzo, coming to you live on tape from the ancient capital, Kyoto of Japan. And here with another episode of My Taste is Better Than Yours. And joining me, as always, is my co hosts from the current capital of that other island nation far across the sea, London, England. How are you doing, Samu?
I'm doing well. Current capital. Hopefully, it remains the capital.
As far as I know, there are no plans to move it unless there's like some annexation thing, like with Greenland or something. But I think you're in safe ground. We're here to talk about one of the absolute legends in the history of manga, and that is Adachi Mitsuru. But yeah, so this year is his 55th anniversary as a mangaka, which should let you know that he's in his 70s. He is still working, still serializing mix, and one of the giant names in the history of the medium. There's no question about it. A hugely influential figure in anime and manga. I did a bespoke piece for my website lostinanime.com about another one, Rumiko Takahashi, and I would put Adachi kind of on the same level as Rumiko, as a titanic figure in manga. Less so in the West than she is, but in Japan as big. And they're buds, by the way, the two of them. So, um, but we're going to focus specifically on two Adachi series here, which are Touch and Cross Game. And the reason I wanted to focus on these two, there's a couple of reasons. The most obvious and probably the most relevant for me is that I think they're the two masterpieces of his career, but also because I think there's a fascinating symmetry in that one of them was written relatively early in his career. When I say relatively early, I mean 45, 50 years ago when he started it, and the other is relatively recent, more in the reign of 15 years ago. So he was at a very different age when he wrote these two series. And while there are many superficial similarities between them, I know that's shocking with Adachi to talk about superficial similarities, but there are. I think under the hood they're quite different, and I thought they would make interesting bookends for us to talk about in this episode. So before I dive in on Touch and Cross Game, Samu, do you have any general thoughts about Adachi Mitsuru you want to share before we get started?
I think my feeling with him in general is he's a very unique mangaka in terms of the tone and the feeling that you get when you're immersed in his world. Uh, similar, well, I was going to say similar. Another author that I think channels that would be Hirohiko Araki with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. There is no similarities in terms of the tone of those series, but those are both mangaka that I feel just encapsulate their own individuality. And
Mm.
there's not many comparisons I feel you could make stylistically with other series. They kind of just operate on the rules that they've set for themselves. And it almost feels like if I'm reading other series concurrently with Adachi series like I am with Mix at the moment, I kind of have to like adjust my headspace and my way of thinking when I jump into his series. So I think, yeah, he has an identity to him, which I think is really impressive.
I totally agree with you. He's stylistically he's unique. There's no one, but he manages to be unique and influential at the same time, which is interesting. You can see the way he's influenced a lot of other mangaka. I think, to me, it's impossible, for example, to read Anohana Blue Box and not see the influence of Adachi in that series. But it's by no means is it only that series. But and yet you would never ever mistake an Adachi series for anybody else's series. You could easily mistake it for a different Adachi series, but you would never mistake it
True.
for anybody else's. I mean, he has that self-referential and self-deprecating humor is definitely a common thread in Adachi series. Breaking the fourth wall, he loves to do that. the obvious unique chemistry of the sports and life romance angle, which he balances differently than anyone else does. Blue Box probably comes as close to the same balance, although it's worked differently. But very, very few series manage to balance the two. My view on sports, most of Adachi series are sports themed in some way or another, although not all of them. I my the way I phrase it is that with Adachi, sports is the canvas, and the story of the characters is the painting. And so I always feel like the sports is never the main point of the Adachi series. It's only the means he uses to communicate a character story, which is one of the things that I think really makes him very, very special.
From my side as well, I was just checking, I've read five of his series at this point. Obviously, the two we're going to touch on, Touch and Cross Game, Mix, his ongoing series. And I did also read his two first serializations, which are Nine and We Are After School Young Generals. So, very different vibe from those two. But I think Nine in particular is actually very, very decent. Again, very different from what he even is like in Touch, which I'm sure we're going to touch on. But
Yes.
that is the series where I think he starts becoming recognizably the artist and the author that he is from that point onwards.
There's another series I would call people's attention to, which is Over Fence. Adachi went through a phase where he, he started a bunch of series and then just stopped them. I don't think Adachi was ever getting like canceled, but I think there were like 4 or 5 series he went through a stretch of these where he stopped and he'd like do a certain number of chapters. Then I don't know whether he got bored or what the deal is, but he just stopped. And Over Fence was a baseball series,
Wasn't Idle Ace
and
that one as well?
yes, that was one of them as well. Yes, and so it's a weird thing, and I don't know why he did it. But if you're looking for a shorter Adachi series that you just want to get a little taste of what he's like, I think Overfence is very underrated, and I was very disappointed he didn't finish it. Another series of his, which maybe you haven't read, Samu, is called Jinbei, which is one of his seinen series, and it's
Yeah, I
relatively
haven't read it.
short, only I think one volume actually, and it's a story about a father and daughter, and it's totally different than anything else I've read by him, and I really really enjoy it. I think it's terrific. That's Jinbei. But let's talk about the two that we're going to talk about, which are Touch and Cross Game. So I'm going to give you the brief synopsis of the two, and then we'll jump into Touch, which chronologically, of course, comes first. And of course, synopsis with Adachi, you have to be a little careful. How in the heck do you even do a non-spoiler section with an Adachi discussion? But Touch is a story about two brothers, twin brothers, Tatsuya and Kazuya Uesugi, and their next door neighbor and friend Asakura Minami. And I know what you're thinking, readers. Even if you don't know Touch, yes, this all sounds very familiar. But the whole thing with Adachi is kind of taking the same formula and reworking it in interesting ways over and over. And I think the familiarity is one of the things that we love about it. But Touch was the one that, in many ways, really established many of the things that would be, tent poles of his career.
It's the
And
OG.
yeah. And there was once this is true that he was once in a television interview where he was shown his own characters and asked to tell which series they came from, and he missed on a couple. That tells you that even his visuals, there is a little bit of a same face syndrome with him too. But as you know, common brother dynamic. One of them is they're both good athletes. One of them is very driven, very focused. The other one is kind of more laid back and lackadaisical. The older brother is Tatsuya, and he kind of intentionally takes a backseat to the younger one. Even though he's a great athlete himself, he kind of lets Kazuya take the spotlight. The other series we're going to talk about is Cross Game, And this, unlike Touch, is licensed in English, and Touch is not, which is ironic for reasons we'll talk about in a minute. But Cross Game is about a young lad named Kitamura Kou, and anyone who follows me online will recognize the avatar. The one I use is Kitamura Kou. That's how much I think of him. And he lives next door to four sisters who he lives. His family runs like a batting center, and next door, or it's a coffee house and a batting center basically. And the four sisters, the Tsukishima sisters, and they're named after the four seasons. And one of the daughters was born on the same day as Ko, and they're extremely close. She's one of the middle daughters. And both of these series are largely focused on baseball and Koshien. And Touch is a lot longer than Cross Game, but they both have a long story arc. Both received highly, highly, highly acclaimed anime adaptations. And as I said, the manga were roughly 30 to 35 years apart at the time of their composition. So before I jump into Touch, do you want to make any quick comments on these two series specifically?
I think what I will touch on is that
Haha.
I don't know how you're going to discuss this, but what I will say is clearly you have a preference among the two. This is obvious,
It's
and
love and love more, by the way. That's my preference.
I fall the opposite way, and I do enjoy both of them, but I found myself I think when I reflect on both of them, I feel like Touch is more of my favorite series. Um, but it's a funny one because Touch for me, if I'm going to use another baseball analogy, the batting average for a chapter of Touch is lower. I enjoyed
Mm,
it less, chapter to chapter, moment to moment. But once the full picture came more realized, and particularly in the final stretch, that's when I realized, oh wait, I'm really invested in these characters,
mm.
two characters in particular. Funny enough, even though if you were to ask me like midway through the series, I would say Cross Game is a better composed and flow, like it's better flow, everything in that way. But for whatever reason, the characters in Touch totally won me over out of the two in the end.
Yeah, it's spoiled for choice. I mean, I love them both, and I think they're both masterpieces. But well, let's talk about Touch first. But as a more general point, we'll do a non spoiler section. But do you think in this day and age that people go into an Adachi series expecting a big twist? Do you think that's just considered to be part of the landscape even before they pick up the first volume?
Well, I would say as someone who's now read quite a few of his series, I do expect that. He has a lot of tropes that he relies on, and that is definitely one of them where there's some sort of tragic event happening that reframes, shakes up the story. The only thing is, it happens at different occasions
Yep.
in all these series, and even another one in Mix, which happens way, way later on. So there's not really a fear of like spoiling that one when it does come. But yeah, I what I will say about Touch, I did read it after. It's kind of hard to separate the cross game one from its identity. I feel with Touch, I did not know it was going to happen until just briefly before, and I got spoiled by looking up on Wikipedia, looking up something, the character's name I probably shouldn't have. So, yes, as someone who's a little bit more familiar now, I expect it. But when I was reading Touch, for example, I didn't know what or when was going to happen specifically.
Touch. Let's talk about Touch. And first, I want to talk about the role Touch plays in the Japanese popular landscape. In some respects, it is the most popular anime manga in Japanese history, more than Kimetsu, more than One Piece. It achieved higher TV ratings than any anime adaptation has ever achieved. For a number of years, I don't know exactly how many, the most popular children's names in Japan were Tatsuya and Kazuya for boys and Minami for girls. And I don't know how much more of a statement of popularity you can get than that. It had a full adaptation of the manga as a TV anime, which was 80 some episodes, I believe. It had several original anime OVAs and theatrical movies. It had multiple live action adaptations. It had it has a level of cultural penetration. Even now, people know it. Kids know it. But there was a time when it was, it was staggering how well known and how popular. So I want to put this question to you and Samu, and see if you can throw a shot at it. We're going to get into cross game and even a little bit mix as we go along. But what do you can you, if you could put a guess on it? And admittedly, we're talking about something that happened 40 years ago, but why do you think touch specifically hit such a nerve that it became so massively, incredibly popular on a level that we maybe even can't really grasp today?
I mean, I think it is worth noting as well that Touch and Adachi as a whole, he's not as popular beyond Japan. I feel like all his
No.
everything to do with his acclaim and popularity is his appeal specifically to Japanese audience. So maybe you could argue there is something about his series, his approach that resonates specifically with people in Japan. Maybe if thinking on Touch, the time it did come out, so this was the 80s, um, maybe perhaps it appealed to the sensibilities of people at the time. Thinking of the artwork as well, he does go through an evolution. His artwork has a plainness to it that I think I could compare to someone like Shimura Takako, where perhaps you can like project onto what you're seeing with the characters. And we'll probably talk about this as well, but he also is very good at showing restraint. Maybe it's a weird thing to say, but it's this mixture of plain aesthetic that you can project onto with also this restraint narratively that he has often that creates this pace which is just kind of easy to get immersed in. Maybe it is a case of Touch specifically. It was the right time for that type of series to come out and appeal to mass audiences in the way that it did. I don't know if that's specific enough, but you're
Well,
more
it's interesting.
you're more clued in the history of it, so I'm curious what your take is.
Well, it's interesting. One thing I would say that we've talked about with kaiju is that they appeal both to both genders. And one thing that's an interesting side note about Touch is it won the Shogakukan Award both for shonen and shojo during its run, which is extremely extremely unusual, if not unique. Obviously, if baby names are coming from this series, we know that it had big appeal to both males and females. I think to a certain extent, it may be that the reason Touch, more than any of his other series, became so huge is because once he did it, there would never be that wow moment of another Adachi series. I think Adachi series, visually and thematically, are similar enough that once he had one big massive hit, it was always going to be hard for him to have another one on the same level because there's too many similarities from one Adachi series to the next, which is comforting and familiar and nice, but probably limits their upside a little bit commercially. The other thing I will say about Touch is it sold over 100 million copies as a manga, which is a ton and makes it one of the best selling manga of all time. But that's for a manga that only ran for 23 volumes. So, or 26 volumes, excuse me. So, he's averaging over 4 million copies per volume, which is a lot. Most of the series in the top 20 are like 35 volumes, 50 volumes. There aren't a lot of series in the 20s, that have gone over the 100 million mark. So, yeah. So, okay. So, Touch. Let's talk a little bit about the specifics of this series. I think we probably have to go into the spoiler section pretty early here. I don't know how much more we can really talk about the specifics of touch. We can talk more about Adachi, but I don't think we can talk too much more about touch without talking about what happens after the big reveal. Are you okay with that?
Go for it. Yeah. And then we'll jump back in, I
So
suppose, with cross game and
yeah,
do the
yeah,
same
yeah,
story. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So the whole thing with touch is that Tatsuya, the older brother, and it's always the lower key brother that's the hero in an Adachi series. If there are brothers, I've found that to be true. He loves that kind of low key, self effacing hero. Tatsuya is under no illusions about how good he is, but he chooses to step back and let his brother um, take the spotlight. To the point where he even declines to play baseball, even though he's even his brother is aware that if Tatsuya played, he could potentially take the ace role and do all the things that he ends up doing. I think it was around volume 7 or 8. Am I right? Where the big event happens. I think it's the 8th volume, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Kazuya, uh, it's a Chuck Kun situation. But he was one of the first to ever do it, and there's no isekaiing. He just flat out dies. And at the time, I think that was pretty shocking because obviously Adachi had not set the precedent for what would happen in an Adachi series. So, for this pleasant, as you said, he gets a rhythm, very relaxed, kind of low key. It gets you, he draws you into his world, and it's a really a nice place to be, and you really like these people, and it almost feels like you're eavesdropping on real conversations, and then boom. um, and that may be another factor in why touch was the biggest one, because he could never surprise people the way he did with touch. He could never do that again. So Kazuya dies, and at this point Tatsuya kind of steps into the breach and decides that he's going to become the ace of the baseball team reluctantly. But he decides he's going to become the ace of the baseball team, and he decides, that his way, in a sense, he never comes right out and says this, but in a sense, I think the way he's going to honor his brother's memory is to step up and be the best version of himself that he was keeping in reserve, to let his brother have the spotlight. So, the first question I'll ask you, Samu, is how did you feel when it happened? What were the feelings that it sparked in you?
What I found from this incident and similar moments of drama in Adachi series is, like I've said, he shows restraint and he doesn't overly dramatize the moment, the occasion of these things happening. The fact that he chooses to instead focus on reflection or jumping ahead or specifically cutting away to someone else who and seeing their reaction and presenting that to the reader. That's what I remember from this series, from anything else as well. And it puts me in a weird spot because in one way I really appreciate that he's committed to what his way of telling the story. There is a part of me that sometimes is like, oh god, I feel like there's such a goldmine of opportunity there for you to just go really deep. As I say, he understands the pace of which he wants to tell these stories, and even if there is a big dramatic event that happens, the aftermath of that, the drama that comes from it, that stretches across pretty much the rest of the entire series. It's not something which
Right.
is contained just to that point. Um, so it is rewarding in the long run. I do think for touch specifically, yes, it kind of just happened, and I was like, oh wow, that was quick. Kazuya is dead. Of the two of them, I'm not surprised Kazuya was the character to die because the having Tatsuya be the lead and this idea of the quote unquote more talented brother who's holding himself back, then have to live with this reality of his brother not being there and then taking on his role. And I think that made for a good dramatic opportunity. I would imagine this was conceived from the beginning of the series, and it would not, maybe it wouldn't have been anywhere near the mammoth that it is now if there wasn't this specific event that happened.
I certainly agree with that. I think it was conceived from the beginning, and I don't think the series would have been the massive hit it was if that hadn't been an element of it, because that set it apart from pretty much every other sports manga that had ever existed up to that point. Um, it is ironic, that over 100 million volumes sold, this massive hit, and still to this day never licensed in English. Touch the manga, which is it's really mind-boggling when you think about it. Now, because so much of our conversation is going to be in comparing the two series, I think rather than encyclopedically look at Touch start to finish, let's jump into Cross Game then, uh, which uh, which is licensed in English, and I think the anime brought a lot of people's attention to Adachi, and I think it became quite popular among anime fans who, at the time it was running, which was in the 2008 to 2010 period, were a pretty select group in most English speaking countries. It was not nearly as mainstream as it is now. So I think Cross Game, among the small pond that anime fandom was at that time, became a pretty big fish and actually turned a lot of people on to Adachi. And again, ironically, in the West, Cross Game is probably better known than Touch. But in Japan, certainly it did well, but nowhere near as big a hit as Touch, which is a hugely high bar, admittedly. Cross Game, which he began 29 years after finishing Touch. Cross Game is the story of, as I said, Kitamura Kou. And again, we've got a baseball situation. We've got childhood friend neighbor situation. The childhood friend neighbor is also an athlete in Touch. She's a rhythmic gymnastics person. Oh, did you say Hina? Oh, I'm sorry. No, her name is Minami. She's a rhythmic gymnastics person. And in Cross Game, oh, this is interesting. One of the sisters is a baseball player. Uh, and yes, there are girl baseball players, not just softball, but baseball. If you watch the Little League World Series, you've seen girls play on the boys' teams in the Little League World Series. It's relatively rare, but it does happen. But what happens in baseball is that once they reach middle school, the girls are generally channeled out of baseball and channeled into softball. This is an issue that we see addressed directly by Adachi in Cross Game. It's also an issue that's addressed directly in Major Second, as a matter of fact, which is another baseball manga and anime that I dearly love. And again, with Cross Game, we have a Adachi twist. And again, I'm going to jump into it early, so I'm going to jump right into the spoiler section here. I so sorry, but I think
Well,
we
it's a
kind of
very
have to
early
do it.
twist as well.
It is a very early twist in the anime, even earlier than the manga, I might add. So at the end of the first volume in the manga and the first episode of the anime, uh, the sister Wakaba, who was born on the same day as Kitamura Kou, the protagonist, and with whom they have kind of a soulmate relationship, and they're kind of like, she's already decided what presents he's going to get her on every birthday and everything else, to the point where they're going to get married and when they're going to get married and where they're going to get married and the whole thing. She dies. Okay, well, it's Adachi. There you go. She dies. Actually, she's on away at like an outdoor camp, and she dies rescuing another child who's drowning. Um, and Again, this happens much earlier in the story in Cross Game than Kazuya's death happens in Touch, but I think it's appropriate in each case because the death plays a different role in the different series. And this is what I will say on the subject is I still remember the reaction people had to the first episode of the anime, which was uh, I think rightly regarded as one of the best opening episodes in the history of anime. I would fully stand by that statement. It's tremendous, great emotional impact. But that's an Adachi thing. And here's the thing with Adachi. Uh, what he's probably better at than any other mangaka is dealing with the subject of grief. And it's interesting. I don't know whether Adachi has personal experience in this, but or if he's just extremely perceptive about human nature. But he has a gift for dealing with grief in a really profound and meaningful way, and it all ties into the understatement that you talked about. He never plays for the big overhype emotional crescendos. He just lets the emotions speak for themselves. And one of the things that I will say about Adachi that many writers could learn from, he understands the value of silence. He understands the value of just observation. He lets us see how these people are feeling without telling us how they're feeling, because he doesn't have to tell us how they're feeling. The characters are well enough written, they're well enough established that even after one volume, as it happened with Cross Game, we don't need to be told. We can see, we can feel it, we can understand it. And it's this restraint. Restraint is such a key word with Adachi. Understatement is another way you could frame it. He just lets the emotional power of these situations speak for themselves. He doesn't beat you over the head with it. And how would you say the twist? Let's not talk about ramifications. Let's just talk about in the moment. How did the twist in Cross Game impact you differently than the twist in Touch?
I think the twist and cross game, the immediate impact, I definitely felt it much more. I have not yet watched the anime. I did know that the anime covered basically the first volume in one episode, which to me seems wild. I believe it does some flashbacks in the episodes after that.
It
Um,
does.
yes, okay, but definitely a bold decision to get to the big full stop at the end of that first volume. But I remember reading the first volume, and that that hit me way harder than what happened with Kazuya in Touch. Tell me if you disagree on this. Maybe you will. I feel like even though Adachi is a very very great he's a very very good artist, and he has his own specific style and the way he delivers the series that makes complete sense and with what he's doing. I do feel, especially in these dramatic moments, that he does same face but he does same expression sometimes to me. And I feel like the ways that he can convey this sense of silence and drama and internal thoughts of the characters isn't necessarily through the expressions that they're making, but rather his choice of paneling, when he cuts away, when
Mm.
he has characters do something else. So, in a way, I think it's smart that he's able to utilize other ways to show what the characters are feeling. Because if I was to give a very slight critique, I feel like, whether intentional or down to just what he's able to do, the expressions of these designs that he is so known for, I feel like there perhaps isn't as much range in them in that way. So maybe you disagree with that, but as I said, I feel like it doesn't take away too much from the drama. He finds smart ways to incorporate it in other ways in the narrative.
I agree with you. I do. I think that there is visually speaking, there is arguably too much consistency from series to series. But again, with his visuals is like his dialogue. It's minimalist. He doesn't. He lets he lets the silence speak for itself in terms of the narrative. He kind of lets these faces speak for themselves without pouring too much into it. Because see what happens is I think we're projecting ourselves onto these people because of that. I think people find it easier to project their own emotions and their own feelings onto the characters because Adachi does not over detail them. He doesn't give them over dramatic expression or wildly distinctive features. They're very familiar. They feel like almost family members because we know them so well. And he's very, very understated in the designing of the characters themselves and their expressions. And I think actually that people project themselves onto them more easily because of that. That's my theory, anyway. And then also, you mentioned Mix earlier, which, just to clarify, Mix is a sequel kind of, I would call it a non-linear sequel to Touch, which is a manga he's currently serializing and has had two seasons, two core seasons of anime. And there is a twist in Mix as well. And I think he handles it so beautifully in Mix. Honestly, that twist, it's less shocking in a way than the twists in Touch or Cross Game. But again, he just such a beautiful job of showing us the aftermath of that moment and how people react in those situations. I think it's just heartrending how well he does it. I mean, and Mix is not a series I put on a par with Cross Game and Touch across the board on the whole, but in that sense, I think it totally is. I think that that's one of the highest moments it achieves, dramatically speaking, as a series.
That the way that that was different is obviously it comes later on, but it's also not as pivotal to reshaping or framing the series as
Right.
Cross
The
Game and Touch are.
context is very different. The context is very different too.
Yeah, it feels like something that happened in these characters' lives that they have to push through it, work around, rather than it, it goes much deeper on a narrative level. If we're gonna speak on Mix very briefly, again, this is another series I feel like he shows great restraint, because maybe you feel the same way. I feel others do as well. I'm like, God, come on, give us the characters we want to see. Give us.
Yeah, yeah,
He's very committed to showing the B, potentially C tier characters and references and locations, which are all very nice, and the callbacks and um, at the part where we are in the stories now, we have chapters dedicated to older versions of Touch characters, but it feels like he's skating around the main course where like we continue to have the appetizers over and over.
yep,
And for a series which is almost, what's it, like 22, 23 volumes, it's already
yeah,
quite a bit longer than Cross Game and approaching Touch levels. I
yeah.
do hope that his restraint, at least narratively, I hope he leans into more of what could be more satisfying to draw it in as a complete sequel. But I do think reading it, it is actually one of his like easiest series to read. It's super breezy, and yeah, to me, it feels like the most baseball centric of all these baseball character drama romance series that we've discussed.
Hmm. Hmm. That's
I
an
feel like
interesting sidebar question in and of itself. I well, first I would also add that Mix is a monthly, which it separates it from Touch and Cross Game as well, which makes this absolutely snail's pace fan service even more frustrating because you have to wait a month between every chapter. I don't disagree with that assessment at all. He's milking this for all it's worth. It's and God love the man, he's not getting any younger. So you know what, it's not his nature, but I wish he would start dishing a little more fan service because we've been very patient, and I think that payoff is going to really hit when he goes there. If he goes there, I mean, who knows? I mean, who knows what he's going to do? um, yeah, I mean, as far as which one is the most focused on baseball, I might argue it's Cross Game actually because of Aoba. I think Cross Game may have the most baseball focus of the three, but curiously, I also think Cross Game is the most romance focused of the three. Let's talk about comparing and contrasting Touch and Cross Game, which when push comes to
okay,
shove is really the nexus point of this broadcast. So roughly 30 years between them, a man in his late 20s, early 30s versus a man in his late 50s, early 60s. Here is how I I Touch to me is like a young, brightly flavored, very fruity, intense wine. And it has a lot of big emotional, by his standards, fairly big emotional moments. And it to me, it goes big in some ways by Adachi standards. Cross Game is like a wine that has been aging in a cellar for 10 or 12 years. It's now very mature. It's like a 15, 20 year old Gevrey Chambertin from Burgundy. It's more subtle. The flavor complexity is greater. It maybe has less instant impact, but the more you savor it, you get more out of it. That to me is essentially the difference between the two series. With Cross Game, I see the perspective of more of a writer who's experienced a lot of regret in his life and learned how to prioritize his emotions in a more mature way than the author of Touch has, which is only understandable given the point in his life Adachi was at when he wrote both those series. I just feel like there's more of that kind of bittersweet quality to Cross Game, whereas Touch is a little bit more primary colored in some respects. I suspect you might disagree with me to that on some extent, but I'm going to throw that over to you and have you respond to that.
I actually don't disagree with that statement. I think in terms of the tone and the how you can feel the reflection in both series of the tragic events, I feel he handles it slightly differently. And one of my favorite parts of Cross Game in particular is with Kou, you feel the impact without him. He's the type of character where he would never say what he's really feeling for the longest time, but you can feel that being carried throughout. So having that character who's holding in so much, you're waiting for that release.
Mm.
In whatever way that does come, and it does come at the very, very end, which I think is a fantastic moment. So I think with Cole in particular, yes, he's probably, from a writing point of view, he's a stronger way of handling these themes of how you have this regret, dealing with trauma. I feel like he did it better that time around. Um, why I prefer Touch, though, I think is, well, there's a couple of reasons. This is going to be, I think, controversial. Maybe this is controversial, and I suspect very different from your feeling. I do not care for Aoba. I'll be completely honest. I understand her character, understand their own situation that she's in with how she's processing what happened to her sister. I, for 90% of the series, found her extremely annoying. If she is the blue box Hina of Cross Game for me. Sorry to
Okay.
say, and I like how it resolves between them, and I think that is the best part of their relationship. And so I think I wasn't as sold on the pairing as I am with Touch. I think yes, there is a sweetness there to it, but I think I was more enamored by how straightforward yet unspoken their affection was for each other.
Mm-hmm.
Both, and again, both the series have this dynamic of taking out this sibling who would have ultimately changed the romantic potential of both these pairings. And I feel like Cross Games 1 is just a little bit, I'm not going to say gross or icky because it's definitely not, but it's definitely a stranger way to navigate, let's say, the internal dynamics within a family of sisters. And yeah, I feel like that was a little, I never fully bought into that
Okay.
as I did with Kazuya being taken out of the picture and Touch.
First of all, I do consider for much of the series, Alba is pretty annoying. I totally get that. Um, and she is one of the proto tsundere characters in anime and manga. That she is one of she's like Asuka from Eva. She's one of the prototypical ones. However, I do think that the relationship between Minami and Tatsuya is much more straightforward and affectionate in touch, and in that ways it's more approachable. But I think that this this barrier that exists, that it's there because Alba puts it up, is one of the most interesting parts of Cross Game, and it can be frustrating at times. But I also think in the end that gives it, that's some of the more of that bitterness and complexity that I'm talking about with the wine analogy. I think in the end that's more interesting as a relationship than the one in touch. Maybe less endearing, but more interesting. The other thing I'll say is there's one time I remember you mentioned that about Kou never really showing his emotions and telling you how he feels. And there's one time, I don't know if you remember it, it's early in the series, but there's one time, really only one time where he really does. And he actually loses his temper with Aoba. And it's only one time. And that's when the little sister is sick, and she has a bad cold, and the parents are out of town at a the two sets of parents, they're all good friends, and they're all out of town at an onsen weekend or something like that. And so Momiji, who's the youngest daughter, she's about 10 years old at this point, she gets a cold. Alba is kind of hopeless around the house. Wakaba was really good at it, but Alba's kind of hopeless with it. So Ko ends up helping around the house and taking care of the little girl because that's what he does. He takes care of people. And she makes some crude comments making light of death. And in the context of the moment, he loses it with her, and he goes off on her. I mean, like he like grabs her around the collar, and he lets her know, no, you don't go there. This is the only time in the story that happens. And I think that's I think it's an incredibly powerful moment in the story. And B, I think it tells us a lot about his character. And in that moment, instead of getting angry with him, this is a rare moment. Alba is not a character who likes to admit she's wrong. She realizes and admits that, you know what, I shouldn't have done that. I'm wrong. You're right. I that set the tone for in effect the whole series in many ways, I think. And in a much more direct way, I think, than Touch is. Certainly Kazuya's death is the integral moment in Touch, but more so in Cross Game, the death of Wakaba is the entire series is really about the different ways the different characters react and change because of her death. And it's especially a Ko and Alba, most especially. And what we see about Alba that annoys you, which annoyed me a lot of the time too, it a lot of that comes as directly as a result of that's her way of coping with Wakaba passing away, because she worshipped Wakaba and she resented Ko for having a close relationship with her, but also she measured herself against her. And all the time Wakaba was alive, Alba never felt she could measure up to Wakaba. And then when Wakaba up and died, that made, for the rest of her life, then Alba was going to have to carry that with her of never being able to measure up to this sister. And I think when you look at it from that perspective, I think her behavior, while indisputably kind of annoying, is also sort of understandable. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think it makes sense. And again, I think what you say about him showing his age and maturity and the way he reflects on these similar scenarios, I think he tackles it in a more grounded and impactful way in Cross Game. Maybe for me, it's just down to the character that did get removed from the story, whether that be Kazuya or Wakaba. I felt like Kazuya always seemed to be in service of Tatsuya. Um,
Mm.
so that made sense, and I think just continued the relationship of Tatsuya and Minami in a way that I resonated more with me. Whereas I was always left with this feeling of, oh, I wish it was just Wakaba who was around instead.
Yeah,
Um,
well,
so yeah,
but
it's
you
very
but you
much
see, that's what Alba thinks a lot of the time too. Though you see, she thinks, why maybe it should have been me. You know,
yeah.
um, so he's going there on purpose, is my argument.
Hmm.
And yeah, but I totally get what you're saying. The other reason I love Cross Game, honestly, is because I think Ko is I think he's a phenomenal protagonist. I think he's a tremendously great, like an all time great male lead. Rom com, sports, you name it, any genre. any demographic, I think he's one of the best protagonists in manga. I
Do you
think
feel like you could pick
he.
out his face from all of the Adachi
I
main
could
characters?
absolutely. I could absolutely pick out Kitamura. You can test me on that later if you want. But yes, I do. I just think he's such an incredible anchor to the story because he's such a quiet, understated person, but he has a tremendous sense of integrity. And he's vulnerable in the way a teenager would be, but he's also kind of wise beyond his years. And I think even in the way he responded to Wakaba's death when he was only like 10 or 11 years old, you can see the seeds of the man he would become in that moment. And I think that it carries through. I think of all the characters in all Adachi series, I think Kitamura is the best character in any Adachi series, and that's one of the reasons why I do love Cross Game above even Touch, which I adore. So that would be my stated defense of. And I also we're not going to have time to talk about them, but there's a really interesting batch of. No, this is true in both series. Touch and Cross Game both have a great supporting cast. They both have all the teammates. There's some very interesting teammate characters in both series that are really great. Um, and
I,
the romance angle, complicated, more so in Cross Game than Touch. But what were you going to say on the sporting cast? I think you had something to add there.
One thing that I will say, which docked a little bit of points for me for Touch, thankfully it didn't impact too much in the end, was really in the final hour you got this introduction of this idol character, this little love triangle at the end, which I think was there to drive home the end pairing more to give that
Mm.
push. Um, but I remember when I was reading that, being like, "This is a very out of left field decision," and sudden shift in focus. That was a part of Touch where this supporting cat and the new character being added. I was like, I don't know if I need this completely. And then
Well,
on the other side, I was going to say this is something both, if we're circling back to Adachi as a storyteller, he does this in both these series, and I would imagine various other ones as well. Haven't yet read the fact that he does lean into fan service for his characters with the character designs that they have. To me, is just strange. Like, I'm not a fan service guy. That does not appeal to me. I'm not that target audience, but I can at least understand when certain series do it to be titillating, or that lends to
yeah,
the character designs. To me, I'm like, these characters, Adachi, I don't know what you're doing. You do not need to show these panty shots of these girls. There's nothing inherently sexual about them to me. Um, and then I think with Cross Game as well, he does. This is not a major point, but maybe this also shows his age. He loves a little self insert, much more than he does in Touch. There's so much breaking the fourth wall, particularly early on. I was like, I remember when I was reading the series, I was like giving you my thoughts as I was going, and I was saying, I wish he would disappear from his own series. I don't need to know about it actually within the context of Cross Game.
well, yeah, he does love a good self insert. Well, Togashi does too occasionally. So I mean, but the other thing I will say about the fan service question is, I think a lot of times when he does the fan service, he actually literally makes a joke about it in the series at the time he's doing it, which I think gives you a sort of an idea of where he's coming at it from. It's kind of just he's like, haha, this is something that I'm supposed to do because it's a shonen. And I don't think he means it. You said you don't find it to be titillating, whatever at all. I don't think he even intends it to be. I think he's just basically doing it as a joke. I really believe that. Um, but it's never to the point where it's like, oh my god, this is like a deal breaker for me. It's never that level. Um, but yeah, no, I want to briefly talk about the ending because it's very interesting. Because Cross Game, we do get a fairly long depiction of the big game, which is, by the way, the qualification game, the Tokyo qualifier to get into Koshin. It's not Koshin itself. He never shows Koshin itself in either series. Actually, it's getting into Koshin that's the big deal. And he doesn't do that in Touch, but and he also, though, in Touch, the status of the main couple is left, at least to me, very open ended. Um, I don't feel like he resolves that, and I feel like in Cross Game he does. I feel like there's no doubt at the end of Cross Game of where things stand between Kou and Aoba. I think he makes it very clear, and it's certainly a non-traditional conclusion, romantically speaking. But given what an extremely strange pairing they are to begin with, I think it perfectly fits those two characters and the way they've interacted with each other for 16 volumes or however many volumes it was. 17 volumes. So, in any event, we're not talking about I love one and I hate the other here. These are both series that we both, I think, have a lot of fondness for. It's just that we are more fond of different ones of the two. But, okay, so uh, at this point, that's a long discussion. Either one of these series could as easily have been the full hour plus, no problem. But since they're not, we're not going to get to a lot of details. But we are going to do our usual recommendations and scoring. So I'm going to let you go first on the recommendation side, Samu. Again, I would say does not necessarily. You don't have to think the listeners. You don't have to think of this necessarily as a touch cross game recommendation, but more of a general Adachi recommendation. Although certainly mm, that might not be a big gap there. So, what are you going to go with on the recommendation side?
For me, I'm going to recommend Straighten Up. Welcome to Shika High's Competitive Dance Club by Takumi Yokota, who I believe is an author that you're quite a fan of as well. This was one of their weekly Shonen Jump titles that they did in the 2010s. It's a ballroom sports series, and I think similar to something like Blue Box and similar to what Adachi does, it has the character drama, the romance, the rom-com elements, but also the sports being really a driving force for it as well. So all of that kind of like bleeds into this narrative as this one experience, and it is one of my it's actually one of my favorite Weekly Shonen Jump titles of the 2010s. It did end up being fairly short. It's quite questionable whether it was cancelled or it was ended by Takuma's own decision, but it was satisfying nonetheless. And I think, yeah, the like mixed genres, I think gives an Adachi feel to me.
Interesting, and it's also interesting with Yokota. A lot of series are just art. He just did the artwork. He hasn't actually been the writer on the majority of the series that he's worked on, as far as I know. He's written several series, but he's done a lot of work on series where he just did the art, which is an interesting one. What would you say is Yokota's biggest hit? I mean, I'm off the top of your head. What would you say was the series of his that made the biggest impact?
Onani Master Kurosawa, but I feel like that's kind of
Yeah.
its own lane. It doesn't have a mainstream. It's not mainstream in that way. Um,
Yes.
he also did Shudan shortly after Straighten Up and Weekly Shonen Jump. Both of those, he did the story and artwork. Maybe his most successful series is the ongoing one right now. It has that really long name. The English title is "The Story Between a Dumb Prefect and a High School Girl with an
Yes.
Inappropriate Skirt Length." I've not read that series yet to comment on it, but it seems to have quite a lot of fans, and I'm a fan of him as an author. So that could be maybe that will be his biggest series, unless there's something I missed. Do you have something else in mind?
No, I think I was gonna. I think the one that maybe if you talk to Western fans, it's made the most impact might even be Onane Master Kurosawa because that one is such a provocative series. I ultimately have a very love hate relationship with that series. It's brilliant at being a provocative series, but at the end, I kind of hated it to be honest with you.
I read it as a teenager, and I feel like if I read it now, maybe I wouldn't. I also didn't love
Yeah,
it. I was up and down on
yeah.
it. Maybe I'd be more down now than up if I read
I,
it again.
I I I didn't read it as a teenager, and I suspect I might have liked it more um, if I had. Okay, now I am going to give my recommendation, and I don't know if I will hear from the Peanut Gallery protesting here, but I will say yes, it is a manga. It counts. It qualifies, and that is Anohana. Ano himita hana no namae o boku tachi wa mada shiranai. which of course was an anime first, but it did get a manga adaptation by Chou Heiwa Busters and Izumi Mitsu, a complete adaptation in manga form. Quite good, actually. Much like Fooly Cooly, an interesting manga adaptation that took some slightly different directions with the story and is worth consuming in its own right. And the reason I'm choosing Anohana, which I do know you love as well as I do, the reason I'm choosing it is because it would be easy to choose Blue Box, of course, because Blue Box is a modern sports romance manga that clearly has an Adachi influence and achieves a somewhat similar balance between romance and sports, although it does so in a different way. But the similarities with Blue Box are superficial and less so once you go beneath the surface. With Anohana, there are not a lot of superficial similarities, but the deeper you go, the more similar the two series are. And because Anohana is really about um, how characters deal with grief, with misfortune, with someone who is gone from their lives and yet not gone from their lives because their memory, the people who have left behind, their memories of that person are still so profound and so real. Now, it's handled in a different way in Anohana, in a much more literal way. Nevertheless, I think you do get a similar package where you have young people dealing with something that young people shouldn't have to deal with in their lives, and the impact that this has on them. Anohana is a far more stylistically a far more overtly emotional series than anything Adachi would ever write. I mean, it's Okatamari for crying out loud, but nevertheless, it was the first thing that came to mind when I thought, what am I going to recommend after Touch and Cross Game, especially Cross Game. And immediately Anohana sprang into my head. And then I thought, no, not Anohana. That doesn't make any sense. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized, you know what? That does actually make perfect sense. And so that is my pick. Any reflections on that one?
Well, Anohana is my favorite anime of all time, so I would recommend anyone to watch it in any circumstance. And yeah, I feel like how it explores the central topic of losing someone at a young age it leans more towards cross game. Um,
Yes, I agree.
yeah, so I'm guessing that's maybe why as well it resonated with you as a pick. Again, that is not one I would have thought initially because stylistically it is very different, narratively as well. But on that specific point, yeah, that's a good recommendation.
And another thing they have in common is great emotional honesty. They're very authentic. None of neither series, as different as they are, as different as the path they take to get to the emotions they instill in the reader or viewer. I think it comes across as being completely natural and completely honest, and they get there through honesty, which I really appreciate.
Yeah.
Okay, now ranking time, and this is for first on my taste. We're going to have two sets of rankings to give. All right, I'll go first then with touch. My ranking with touch is 95 out of 100,
Wow.
um, which, considering it's my second favorite series by one of my favorite mangaka, I don't think it's too surprising that the score is that high. I kind of wavered on this a little bit, and I maybe fudged it a little higher based on the social impact Touch has had, and maybe giving it an extra point because it is one of the most influential and one of the most popular series in anime history. So objectively speaking, it's probably a 94, but I'm giving it a 95 because it is a series that changed sports manga, that changed anime, that really set a new bar for how much mainstream penetration a series that's not a battle shonen or an action series or a children's series could impact the general public.
So touch for me, I'm going to give it an 83. That's where I am.
Wow,
So
wow.
I think the where we are with both series and how they compare to each other in different ways. I think we're on slightly different levels. We both enjoy them, but I think just enjoy to different degrees. And as I said, it is my favorite of the two, but you
Okay.
shall find out very shortly by how much.
All right. Yeah. So then I went first. So now you go first. You want to give us your score for Cross Game?
My score for cross game then is 82. So even though I have said in many ways that I feel like I prefer touch, like I mentioned earlier, I do feel that cross game is more consistent throughout and probably better written. It just didn't resonate with me as much, and I feel like Aoba is not a character that I enjoyed following throughout the entire story, even if her character and the way she reacts makes sense. Um, but yeah, that's why they're kind of as very, very similar places in my ranking for both of them.
I'm going to go 96 on Cross Game,
So we're both 1 point
which
difference.
which is one of my five favorite. It's one of my probably well for sure it's one of my 10 favorite manga of all time. Um, I would actually rank the anime maybe a point higher than the manga, even because for me, Miyu Erno and Tomatsu Haruka, who play Kou and Aoba in the anime, are so good. They're generally both great, but they're both, and of course, I might add. Okay, let's throw this out there. Who are the main male character and the main female character in Anohana? It's an ensemble show, but hey, it's Haruka Tomatsu and Miyerno. So there you go. It was a partnership made in heaven. But they're so great in the anime version of Cross Game that I would even maybe notch the anime 1 point higher. But for me, the manga, it's not going to be in my top 3 or 4, but it's not going to miss by much. It's for sure in my top 10. It's my favorite sports manga, and as much as I love Touch was is a lot, and I love Adachi, and these are my two favorite Adachi series. Um, I'm going to give 96 to Cross Game, 95 Touch, 96 Cross Game. You go 83 Touch, 82 Cross Game, and just for fun, just for gits and shiggles, what would you give Mix at this point? And I'll go first. I would give Mix an 83.
Okay. Mix at this point, I think I would probably give 77. I'm
So
finding
actually, you're closer than I am. Actually, even though your score is lower, you're closer to your baseline than I am with that.
yes, I really enjoyed catching up with Mix in the manga. I think I'm feeling the impact of reading it monthly. That is probably going to affect that as well. But we need to see Minami and Tatsuya, and if it goes back there,
Yes,
it'll be back up in
yes.
the 80s. I think that could happen.
Okay. Yeah, I enjoy the cameos from the characters from the first series that we're getting, but yes, I want those two to show up already. But yeah, 83. I really enjoy it. It's good. I don't think it's on the par with either of these series, and neither do you, to be fair. So, but it's
No,
it's it's definitely for a guy who's like 70 whatever he is, he hasn't lost it. That's for sure. He's still got the Adachi touch. I don't think there's any question about it. And as I said, the one particular twist that he deals with in Mix, I think he deals with in a way that is on par, at least in the moment, with anything he's written in Touch or Cross Game. Okay, so that is our look at the Master Adachi Mitsuru, the Master of Same Face, the Master of Cross Game, the Master of Touch, and certainly, without a doubt, maybe not as well known as English as he should be, but one of the most influential mangaka of all time. Someone who's made a great social impact in Japan, and as you said, a really unique figure with a style that's unmistakable for anyone else. And let's you know let's appreciate that he's here with us and still drawing manga and still still vibrant as an artist. It's great. Let's be grateful for that and hope that it goes on for a long time to come. And whenever we get a chance to talk about a legend on this show, I always enjoy it. So, Adachi, thank you very much for all the work you've done. Samu, thank you very much for your wonderful contributions. And We'll see you the next time.
Thank you, thank you. And now I'm in the mode to maybe tackle another Adachi series. Maybe H2 Katsu Rough, one of those ones.
Jinbei.
Jinbei. I mean, I could do that in
Okay.
an hour.
Yeah, you could. Okay. Thanks, everybody. And of course, stay frosty. Talk to you soon.